But now, I know you just landed in Peru on this visit, but you had a chance to visit a project, a climate change adaptation project yesterday in Huacho in Huarua province. That project is one of many being sort of supported by the ICA, this Instituto Interamericano de Cooperación para la Agricultura. Can you just tell us a little bit about your impressions of that project and is it a model for other countries to consider?
It was very interesting, and it's something that I had known very little about, but basically the idea is in that region they receive the water that is used for irrigation from the high Andes, and obviously the amount of water available is a big concern, and availability, at least seasonally, may change considerably in the future. And currently the way irrigation is done in most of that valley is by flooding, basically flooding the fields from channels. And this is a rather inefficient way of actually producing goods. And so that new project that was shown to me there is where they use what's called this drip irrigation, and they basically expanded crops into the desert, and they planted avocados, I think mandarins, clementines, and some other crops, really right in the middle of the desert, and they're just feeding these thin lines of water where they, I think once a week through drip irrigation, irrigate just exactly the point where the plant is growing, thereby not losing any water in the surrounding areas where the water is not really needed. So it's a very young project. All those trees were planted just a year ago or so they're not really having a harvest yet, and it'll be interesting. If I had the opportunity, I would love to go back in a few years when these trees have grown and matured to see what actually came out of this, if it really is a success and works as well as the people who are in charge of this hope that it will. But if this could work, it certainly could be a model that could be applied in many other places, and I know it is. Places such as Israel and so forth, certainly they have been leading the way on those kinds of technologies.
Now, the presentation you'll be giving at the University of San Marcos later today, what's the topic and what's the focus?
The focus of that talk is the impact of climate change currently, but also looking into the future on the degree of glaciation in the Andes. So how are glaciers going to respond to climate change in the future? How much do we know? What are the uncertainties? And how will that affect the availability of water in the rivers downstream? A lot of people often think that if glaciers retreat, we will have less water available or no water available. That's not really the case. The glaciers aren't really there to produce water. They just regulate it seasonally. So the challenge is to understand at what time of the year may we actually have more water, at what time of the year will we have less water, and what are, again, here comes adaptation, what are measures that we can take to sort of alleviate the situation a little bit. And in fact, our results suggest that, particularly during the dry season, which is quite pronounced in the Andes of Peru for 7 to 8 months, that during that part of the year when glaciers provide for a steady base flow, we will have less water available in the rivers. And that's important for some regions of Peru, such as the Rio Santa Basin, which relies heavily on water for irrigation, for sanitation, drinking water, and also for hydropower and electricity production.
You've just dispelled a myth or a worry of mine. I mean, sort of many people that, these glaciers will disappear, then we won't have water to drink. And I mean, the popular imagination has this idea that this disappearance of these glaciers means sort of almost an apocalyptic serenity, but this is not the case.
That is not the case, no. And it is also, I think, important to highlight that glaciers do not provide, or the environmental service that glaciers provide is not equally important everywhere. It's very important in Bolivia, in southern Peru, in regions that are seasonally dry and really where for 7-8 months you don't have any rain and you don't really have another water source. But in other Andean countries that are more humid and you have rain more or less throughout the year, parts of Ecuador, Colombia, glaciers are not quite that important. Plus there you also have other sort of environmental systems that can provide that regulatory functions. Wetlands, paramos for example, they act in many ways very similar to a glacier. but in southern Peru and Bolivia, we don't really have those.
Can those be grown from scratch? Or?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
There are smaller wetland systems, these so-called bofedales, but many of those are actually fed by glaciers, and they need a steady flow of water, so if the glaciers disappear, the bofedales may actually suffer as well. The paramos that we have, the wetlands in the more humid climatic conditions, they are rainwater fed. So if you don't have the sufficient rainfall, you cannot grow or maintain those.
Thank you very much. Estelle, would you like to?
Well, I would have one question.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of experience in the region. You have been in different countries. On your view, which one are the countries that are better prepared for climate change adaptation at the
Mm-hmm.
glacier level in the Andes?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of programs both the U.S. government and universities in the United States
Mm-hmm.
have to offer to these
Mm-hmm.
different countries?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to play one country against the other, but from my experience, certainly the one country that is the most advanced, I think, is Chile. And I think the big advantage that Chile has is that it has invested over a long period of time very heavily in science and in creating information. I think adaptation is very important, but sometimes we kind of rush towards adaptation without really understanding what the issues are. And you cannot put adequate adaptation strategies into place without really knowing what you're adapting to. So we need to first provide the scientific knowledge in terms of what are the changes that we will see in the future. And many of those changes still are very uncertain. There are large error bars associated with every projection or prediction that we make. Mm-hmm. And Chile has invested heavily in science, in education, formation. They have a wonderful new generation of scientists, many very strong institutions that work on this subject, and I think that is their big advantage that they have over most other Andean countries.
And what about programs that can the different countries use
Mm-hmm.
to improve?
Well, I mean, programs, there are many programs in place, from what I know, that are particularly related exactly to that last question: training, education, formation of a new generation of young scientists that can help and work exactly on these topics. The French for a long time have had a wonderful program in many countries run by IRD. They have trained a new generation of scientists in Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador. We are now doing the same out of the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas program with a project that we call Acción, where we have fellowships available to bring young students who are interested in these topics to the University of Albany in the US, where they can be trained in climate science, climate projections, impact studies related to glacier retreat. And the idea is that they can obtain a degree at our university, but also that they're committed to return home, back to their home country, and basically that this knowledge that they acquire is not lost, but that they can contribute towards addressing these issues that are so pertinent and important to their societies.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Matthias.
Thank you
for this time, and good luck with the rest of your visit, and look forward to seeing you again in Peru.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthias.
Great.